So speaking of Joe Biden, Professor Richard Wolff was on George Galloway's show for a pretty interesting interview. And Professor Richard Wolff obviously has been very vocal about the lies that is coming out of the Biden administration in reference to this economy at this point in time. And he hasn't held back on this. Now, you can see him talk about the economic updates once a week on Democracy at Work. But this time he's with George Galloway. Professor Richard Wolff is going to get into what he calls Biden economics. Actually, no, Bidenomics. That's what he's calling it, Bidenomics. Listen to this.
This evening. Tell us about this Bidenomics.
Well, mostly Bidenomics is pretty much the standard kind of mishmash of half-baked ideas designed to keep the base of the political party, the Democratic Party, reasonably happy, sound good to as many other people as possible, carefully avoid honestly dealing with any problem at all, lest it be understood as recognizing that that problem exists. And that's what you have. You sent Mr. Blanken to China a few days ago. He tried to do something that was a little less aggressive than has been the norm. But while he was doing that, his boss, Mr. Biden, geared up to call Xi Jinping a dictator because Americans really like to hear about how dictators are elsewhere, whereas we here live in the greatest democracy the world has ever seen, etc., etc., etc. Janet Yellen's trip, whatever it contains, will for sure carry on with suggestions that the Chinese should change their economic system, they should change their government, and they should be kinder to the Uyghur minority. This coming from a country that has much greater problems with minorities than China has ever had, treats them, and a larger number of them, much worse than what you see in China, not to defend the Chinese, but the hypocrisy, the behavior, it is for a growing number of Americans, above all, embarrassing.
Let's pause here for just a second. So you notice I put in the thumbnail, Professor Richard Wolff goes off. He has a lot more to say. But I just want to add to this point, the fact that Janet Yellen is actually has her hand in how Xi Jinping should actually treat certain people in China, the minority group that they have in China. It is very interesting to Professor Wolff's point compared to the way that minorities are treated in this country. We can't even get, let's be real, okay? You want to talk about like treatment, if our country cared about minorities as much as they say they do, especially the Democratic Party, as much as they say they care about Black people, they care about Latino people, then why do we still have redlining? If they cared about as much as they say they do, why is it you still have these underfunded and under-resourced schools, primarily in these inner city Black neighborhoods or rural, Black neighborhoods, working class neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods? If they care as much as they don't even care enough about you for you to even have the best education possible. They give you just enough to get by and say it's a free education. So this is where you live. This is your zip code. So this is all you get. But we're going to go to another country and tell them how to treat their damn people. Let that sink in.
But let me answer your question directly. The biggest economic problems of the United States can be summarized in this way. We are a declining empire, following in our decline a similar trajectory to what happened to the British Empire a century earlier. We are a capitalism that has produced a level of inequality that is fundamentally unsustainable because it clashes so basically with the carefully cultivated self-image of the United States as not being torn apart by extremes of wealth and poverty.
we'll bring up two examples: the housing crisis and the student debt crisis. The housing crisis. We had one in 2008. We're going through this again now, where people can't buy single family homes because BlackRock and Vanguard Group have bought them. It's not even just because the fact a lot of people can't come up with a down payment. It's because the prices of these homes are astronomical now for a single family home, because companies like BlackRock and other corporate investors have bought these single family homes. They flip the homes and increase the price. So the average person graduating even from college, whether it's undergrad or grad school, you don't have the down payment to even get that house. Now, let me tell you the difference. My parents didn't go to college. I was the first grandkid in my family to go to college. My parents didn't go. My parents bought a house. You see the difference? What happened here? There was once upon a time in this country where people could buy a home and only one spouse had to work and the other spouse could stay at home and take care of the kids. What happened? You see the difference? You shouldn't even have to. This idea that you have to go to college in order to even think about being able to buy a home in this country, that was not always the case. And that's the point I'm trying to get across to people. Now we go into the college issue, the student debt crisis. This is going to balloon into a catastrophe. Because I'm here to tell you, and I saw a video where a guy really broke it down. I'll see if I can pull it up. People can't pay these loans back. And I know some people feel like people took out these loans, they need to pay them back. I get all that. Problem is, people aren't making the wages that they're supposed to be making to pay those loans. Now, we went over that cost of living report just a couple days ago. Most of you in the chat aren't making what you should be making in your state. According to the cost of living report, you have the hotel workers on strike. They're making $20 to $25 an hour in California. They're asking for just a $5 raise. That still doesn't even meet the $42 an hour that, according to the cost of living report, they're supposed to be making per hour just to live. So when Professor Wolff says it's a declining empire, yes, and he's been trying to warn people about this for the past 2 years. And I think more people are starting to see it now.
Mr. Biden, like his Republican counterparts, says not one word about either of these. For many of us watching who have been born and raised and lived in the United States all of our lives, like me, what is the most stunning thing about Bidenomics is its utter emptiness, its utter denial of the most fundamental problems. How are you going to deal with a population that thought the American empire would go on and be dominant forever, more and more? Now that the BRICS have a bigger economic footprint in the world than does the G7, the United States and its allies.
Other countries got together and said, forget the US, we're going to form our own organization here. We're going to be a part of BRICS, and we're going to go forward to our own currency. Forget these people. They literally said, look, forget the US dollar, man. How about we do our own thing over here? And honestly, at this point in time, you can't really blame them when the United States government has had their hand in their countries for decades. When the United States government has contributed to regime changes in some of these countries, you really can't be mad at them. And now we're the ones who are in danger of falling. We have been on top for a long time, and I think that run is over.
Now that the Chinese have demonstrated that they can do the technical wonders that the United States once pretended were uniquely its own creation, and on and on and on. There is a disconnect between not just the government and the mass of people, but the media, but the academic establishment. There is a gulf opening up in this country which probably will have more to do with what happens in the future than anything else. We are making colossal mistakes. Ukraine is only the most recent misunderstanding of what the relation of forces really is. Remember, our president told us that the ruble would become rubble in a matter of weeks. Didn't happen. That the Russian economy would disintegrate in a matter of weeks. Didn't happen. That the Ukrainians would be victorious. Didn't happen. I could keep going, but the point should be clear.
Actually, when we talk about the Russian economy in reference to the sanctions, Germany seems like they're hurting worse than Russia is right now. I told you Germany declared that they are officially in a recession, according to the technical definition of a recession. I mean, it's just, this is a hot mess. Call it all out.
We are not a society that is able anymore to make reasonable decisions because it is so busy denying the fundamental crisis it faces.
You say you could go on and on. I wish you would go on and on. I'd rather give the whole show now over to you. But let me take you back to Reaganomics. I'm so old, I remember when that was a thing. And a good friend of mine, Nico House, said the difference between Reaganomics and Bidenomics is that in Reaganomics, the wealth was supposed to trickle down. In Bidenomics, the wealth just effing disappears.
That's right. And shout out to Nico House. George gave a shout out to Nico House. That's true. All this money just goes, where does this money go? Billions of dollars going to Ukraine. We have a defense budget that's over $800 billion. All this money going out of the door, writing all these damn checks. And then you can't get enough money. You can't make a living wage to pay your damn rent. If you're one of those people and you're sitting back at the end of every month and you're like, man, I hope I make enough in tips this month so I can pay this electric bill. I hope they don't take too many taxes out of my check so I can pay this other bill. The thing is, there's a lot of Americans that are in that position. A lot of people. So yes, there is frustration when I see billions of dollars go out the door to another country, and I'm seeing Zelensky on every damn talk show and news segment. This guy has become somewhat of a sort of celebrity. You don't look like you're fighting to me. I don't see this guy's clothes ever dirty. I don't really see him in no damn uniform. I see him on the cover of magazines. I see him in a chair getting another interview from CNN. That's what I see happening. So where's all this money going? We need to start asking that question.
Is that a fair characterization?
Well, yes, I would amend it slightly. Reaganomics was an argument about a trickle down that never happened. And Mr. Biden is a president who rails against Reaganomics, but does absolutely nothing to deal with the fact that not only did the wealth not trickle down, but it is crystal clear that in a magical denial of gravity, it trickled up.
The American people at this point in time, when we talk about humanitarian issues, right? Or we talk about a humanitarian crisis, the fact that the homeless rate continues to increase, we still have to deal with the inflation. You have the number of people that have been evicted since Joe Biden has been in office, and our government is sending billions of dollars out the door. We should demand that this is a humanitarian crisis in this country for once. And I mean that. We should demand it. And for people who are running, like people like RFK Jr., people like Marianne, people like Dr. West, if I was them, I would make that part of my message. We have a humanitarian crisis in this country right now, and we need to demand that we get those dollars and cents brought to us right here at home first. Always first. You always take care of home base first. That's what people should do. If you're running for office, you really need to make that part of your message.
We have had a growing inequality that has actually gotten worse, both at the time of Reagan and now. We have had a 40, 50 years of uninterrupted redistribution of wealth upward, and that is causing this country to blow apart. The support that I'm sure interests Europeans, the support for white supremacy, the support for an out-of-control, endless liar, grifter, a hustler like Trump, the creation of more and more like him, they all feed off of the bitter anger of masses of people whose jobs are insecure, whose incomes are now inadequate, who went through the redistribution of wealth, then the crash of our economy in 2020, then the pandemic, now the inflation, now the rising interest rates. It's almost a biblical situation of 7 plagues, only they're economic, they're matters of choice of a government so far disconnected that the majority of people left, right, and center hate the government, have no confidence, no belief in anybody who comes forward. We will have in the presidential election, and I sure hope Europeans pay attention, we will have one candidate who has now announced that he will run on the Green Party, a man named Cornel West that I'm sure many of you know of. He will be saying, and he will be the only one talking about the real problems, the real crisis. We just had a Supreme Court in a country where white policemen shoot black people on a regular basis, not like in France every so often, and look what happened in France. No, we've routinized it. But our Supreme Court just took away a program called affirmative action on the premise that, and I quote you now, we no longer have a problem of racial inequality and racial discrimination. If you wanted an example of being deaf, dumb, and blind in our society, there we have it. And
I think this is the first time I heard Richard Wolff be this, because he's usually a lot more, a little bit more polite. But I think this is the first time I've seen him really just like, I think he's had it.
Those are the people at the top.
Well said. Very well said. I'm going to go to one of the comments here that I saw. Sebastian said Bidenomics equals trickle down economics with identity politics. Ding, 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 ding. And the winner is Sebastian.
Well, we will be interviewing Dr. West as soon as we can. And of course, I wish him every success. But there is another candidate, Professor, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with far higher name recognition, voter recognition, who's also saying some truly radical things. That's new, isn't it?
Yes, yes and no. I mean, we did have Bernie Sanders. And for all the things you can say about Bernie Sanders, his race in 2016 and again his race in 2020 opened the space here in the United States for people left of center, or even if they're not themselves left of center, but they have some ideas that are left of center, they can now enter American politics. We have members of Congress who will answer the question, are you a socialist, with the word, yes, I am. We didn't have that for most of the previous half century. So,
but that ain't enough anymore, Professor Wolff. I got to say this one, that's not enough anymore because they've all sold out. Like the squad members are sold out and they've even turned on the railroad workers. So I don't know if I want to mention them.
We are moving forward. Kennedy is able to say some things. On the other hand, he has identified with other positions that make him look very strange to many of the American people who might otherwise be interested in what he has to say. But yes, we have some. And I think you're going to see more and more of them in the years ahead because we have to rebuild what is missing in the United States. We have a far-right Republican Party and a Democratic Party which offers most of the same things, only not quite so quickly, not quite so harshly. But other than that, when we had neoliberal globalization, they were all for that. Now that we have more economic nationalism, they're all for that. They're all for whatever the community of big business and banks feels the need to do. The political parties, the two major ones, do their job of gathering various communities around other issues, abortion, being able to have 27 guns in the back of your automobile, or whatever it is that excites Americans. That's their job. Get those people so they vote for the two parties who can keep a troubled capitalism going for another few years. But the rest of the world sees it. They see that the United States is not the political or economic force it once was, and the whole world is adjusting to that process.
This is probably as candid as I have seen Professor Wolff. He really let all of it out. And who can blame him, right? I mean, at some point, enough is enough. Joe Biden can barely walk, can barely talk. He's stumbling all over the place. It's very apparent. And the Democratic Party still wants you to go with this clown. Excuse me. The Democratic Party still wants you to go with him. Sorry. Thought I was talking to one of my friends for just a second. They want you to like go with him, you know, like just because. Now, I just told you that we need to be very cautious about that housing crisis and the student debt crisis. I want to show you an example of why you need to pay attention to that, particularly the student debt crisis. This gentleman here, I'm going to try to see if I can get him to come on. He's on TikTok as Inverse News. His name is Timothy James. I don't know if you guys have seen this or not. And I wish I could make this bigger. Eric, if you know how to do full screen on this, could you do that? You guys need to hear what he has to say about student debt crisis. And everybody needs to get prepared for this, because when I tell you a lot of these people they don't have the money to pay back these loans, I'm not joking. And I think this is going to be a huge issue if we don't find another way to fix this problem. I thought there was a full screen option on TikTok, Eric. Maybe not. Like on the video, I thought there was a full screen. No. Maybe not. Maybe not. Is this full screen? No. Oh, well, sorry, guys.
Anyone who thinks student loans will ever be forgiven needs to look up SLABs. That was one of the most depressing things I've ever researched. If you're like me and didn't know what SLABs is, it is student loan asset-backed securities. And it is a ticking time bomb. If you're new, hi, I'm Timothy, a quantitative economist and investor since 2007. I learned how to invest through 2008, and this SLABs is just like it. Long story short, student loans make up about $1.7 trillion, and they've been bundled up so that investors can go into these assets.
Sorry, someone told me double click. Oh, it wants me to sign in. Why do I have to do this? I don't even remember what it was, what my TikTok thing was. Eric, do you have TikTok? Can you sign in? That's probably why it's not letting me do it full screen. Let me know. Let me remove it from here for just a second so people don't see the... I just don't remember my... This is bad. I really don't remember my TikTok thing. Like, it's an app on my phone. Oh, what's that, Eric? You don't? Oh, you don't have TikTok? Okay. Yeah, it just sucks that you don't have to. But when I double click on it, it says log into it. That's what pisses. Yeah, it just ticks. Anyway, we'll just go back to the video. I thought at one point I could make this bigger, but it's just not. It's not letting me do that. So we'll just go back to it for the sake of time. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I know. I hear you guys in the, can you zoom on the web page? I can, but it just makes it. Oh, okay. We'll do it like that. Here we go.
student loans will ever be forgiven needs to look up slabs. That was one of the most depressing things I've ever researched. If you're like me and didn't know what slabs is, it is student loan asset-backed securities. And it is a ticking time bomb. If you're new, hi, I'm Timothy, a quantitative economist and investor since 2007. I learned how to invest through 2008, and this slabs is just like it. Long story short, student loans make up about $1.7 trillion, and they've been bundled up so that investors can go into these asset-backed securities, which is exactly how 2008 unfolded. They had all of these mortgages that were getting pumped out, and there came a point where people couldn't pay those mortgages. And from an investor standpoint, 2008 happened because they bundled all of these mortgages together into an asset-backed security. The thought was that, well, if you have thousands of mortgages bundled together, there's no way that this investment could fail. It did. Now, the student loan crisis is significantly smaller than the mortgage crisis of 2008. But $1.7 trillion is nothing to really scoff at. That can be a catalyst that ticks off a bunch of other events. Now, you've got your big names like Morgan Stanley in this, which interestingly, they've been running this Ponzi since at least 2005. That's as far back as I look. And even though Morgan Stanley is a mediator, this is ran initially from the government. And considering most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, especially the younger generations that are dealing with those student loans, the big question is what would happen if a bunch of people stopped paying their loans?
Okay, everybody hold on to that. What would happen if a bunch of people stopped paying their loans, which is what we could be headed towards?
Morgan Stanley, nothing. The government would probably print some money and hand it over to them, even though they're collecting interest. To the average American with that student debt, the first thing is their credit rating would plummet. Getting out loans for other things like homes or vehicles would likely be near impossible. And this slabs may be the catalyst that sparks the 80% drop that I'm calling in the stock market. All major market crashes have some form of catalyst to set off a domino effect, as I mentioned before. This type of model, from an investor's standpoint, is a dream. And the model is clearly unsustainable. Here's an example where someone took out $180,000. They did not make more than the interest payments, and now they're at $206,000. Because people are struggling, the interest will continue to compound, and it will get to a point where they are not paid off. So a slabs crisis is not if, it's more so when. And if you are...
I'll try to see if I can get him to come on, because I'm pretty sure there's so much more to explain to that instead of like a short TikTok video. He could probably go into a lot more detail, but I wanted to show you that because I think people need to really, really be aware. And this is part of the problem, is that you do have people that, you know, they took out a certain amount of the student loan debt, and technically, if wages adjusted for inflation, they would have a salary that would permit them to be able to pay off that interest as well as the loan itself. Unfortunately, that has not happened in this country. So this is part of the problem. So now instead of owing like 100,000, now you owe like 160,000 or something like that. So you owe even more, and you couldn't afford to pay off what you owed in the first damn place. So it's a mess. So get ready for that. I'm gonna go to some of the comments here in the chat. Thank you for the super chat, Delthea. You can't care for black folk and the banks. You can't do it. And Biden loves him some banks. And thank you for this as well. I don't feel people need to pay back loans that were sold to them with lies and subterfuge and promises yet to be filled. Yeah, I hear you. Old man says, today's empire is tomorrow's ashes. Joe says, we are all witness to a multipolar new world order. Shout out to Trailer Park Pundit. That's Chandra from Beauty and the Boomer. Max says, the predator class loves recessions. They get doorbuster deals. There you go. So get ready for this, guys. I told you, they said like the student loans going back into repayment. I said, oh, they're going to be in for a shock because people don't have the money to pay back these loans.